Elizabeth Bathory was the most prolific female murderer in history. She is remembered as the countess who bathed in the blood of young girls to stay beautiful. The truth is even stranger. She was born in 1560 into one of the most powerful noble families in Hungary. Her uncle was a king and her cousin was the prime minister. By 15, she was married off to a war hero named Ferenc Nadasdy, and she moved into a stone fortress called Székely Castle in what's now Slovakia. Her husband spent most of their marriage off fighting the Ottomans. He was nicknamed the Black Knight of Hungary, and the stories say he taught Elizabeth some of his favorite punishments for misbehaving servants. Things like coating a girl in honey and tying her up outside for the ants. When Ferenc died in 1604, Elizabeth was 44 and suddenly the richest widow in the kingdom. She also held enormous loans over the new king's head, money he had no intention of paying back. Around the same time, peasant girls who'd been hired as servants at her castle started disappearing. Then daughters of the lower gentry, sent to the castle to learn etiquette, also vanished. The local Lutheran minister began keeping a private list of bodies he'd been asked to bury in secret. In 1610, the king sent a man named György Thurzo to investigate. He raided the castle at night and, according to his report, found a dead girl in the entryway, another dying in a cell, and several more locked up waiting their turn. More than 300 witnesses testified. Servants described beatings with iron rods, needles under fingernails, girls left naked in the snow until they froze. The number of victims was eventually estimated at anywhere from 80 to 650. The bathing in blood story didn't actually show up until 100 years after her death, in a book by a Jesuit scholar. No witness ever mentioned a bloodbath. But it stuck, because it was the perfect image for a vain noblewoman who'd outlived her usefulness to the crown. Her accomplices were executed. Elizabeth herself, being too high-born to put on trial, was walled up inside a set of rooms in her own castle. She lived there for almost 4 years. Food passed through a slot, until a guard looked through the slot in August 1614 and found her dead on the floor. Jane Wenham lived in the village of Walkern in Hertfordshire, England. By 1712, she was an elderly widow with a reputation for muttering at people who annoyed her, which in a small English village was more than enough to get you watched. The trouble started when she got into an argument with a local farmer over some stolen turnips. He called her a witch. She marched to the magistrate to file a slander complaint, which turned out to be a serious tactical error. The magistrate, instead of finding the farmer, decided to investigate Jane. Soon, a 16-year-old servant girl named Anne Thorne started having fits, claiming Jane sent cats with human faces to torment her in her bedroom. They tried the standard tests. They asked Jane to recite the Lord's Prayer, and she stumbled on one line. They searched her cottage for ointments and pins, and they tried the flying test, where they put her in a chair to see if she'd levitate. She didn't. None of it mattered. The jury found her guilty of conversing with the devil in the form of a cat, and the judge was forced by law to sentence her to death by hanging. But the judge, Sir John Powell, thought the whole thing was nonsense. When a witness testified that Jane could fly, he reportedly said there was no law against flying, and quietly arranged for Queen Anne to pardon her. Jane lived out her last years on the estate of a sympathetic noble who took her in. Her trial became a national embarrassment, and Parliament repealed the Witchcraft Act 23 years later. She was effectively the last person convicted of witchcraft in an English court. Mercy Brown was 19 years old when she died of tuberculosis in January 1892 in the small farming town of Exeter, Rhode Island. They called the disease consumption back then because it seemed to eat people alive from the inside. Her mother had died of it years earlier. Her older sister Mary Olive had died of it after that. And now Mercy. And then her brother Edwin started coughing up blood out in Colorado, where he'd moved, hoping the dry air would save him. The neighbors had a theory. One of the dead Browns wasn't actually dead. One of them was rising at night and feeding on Edwin from a distance, the way a vampire was supposed to do in old New England folk belief. On March 17, 1892, a group of townspeople convinced George Brown, the father, to let them exhume his wife and both daughters. They dug in the frozen ground of Chestnut Hill Cemetery, while a doctor and a newspaper reporter watched. Mercy's mother and sister were skeletons, but Mercy, who'd been kept in an above-ground crypt during the winter freeze, still had skin on her face. Her hair had seemed to grow. When they cut her open, there was liquid blood in her heart. To the crowd, that settled it. They burned her heart and liver on a nearby rock, mixed the ashes with water, and gave the mixture to Edwin to drink as a cure. Edwin died 2 months later. The story made newspapers across America and crossed the Atlantic, where a London theater manager named Bram Stoker clipped articles about it. 5 years later, he published Dracula. In 1324, in the Irish town of Kilkenny, a wealthy moneylender named Alice Keitler was on her 4th husband. The first 3 had all died under convenient circumstances, leaving her their estates. The 4th, Sir John Lepore, was starting to lose his hair and his fingernails, and he suspected he was being poisoned. His grown stepchildren from the previous marriages went to the Bishop of Ossory, a hard man named Richard de la Dreda, and accused Alice of witchcraft. They claimed she had a demon lover named Robin Ardisson, and sacrificed roosters to him at a crossroads. Alice had powerful friends. She was arrested, escaped, was arrested again, and finally fled the country, probably to England. Nobody ever heard from her again. But the bishop still needed someone to burn. He turned to Petronilla de Meath, Alice's maidservant. Petronilla was probably in her 30s, possibly with a young daughter named Basilia. She had no money, no family connections, and nobody to write angry letters to the king on her behalf. They flogged her 6 times. Under the lash, she confessed to everything the bishop wanted. She said she'd helped Alice mix potions from the brains of unbaptized babies, the intestines of roosters, and dead men's clothing, all boiled in the skull of a beheaded thief. On November 3, 1324, Petronilla was tied to a stake in the center of Kilkenny and burned alive. She was the first person in Ireland's recorded history to be executed by fire for heresy. Her mistress, the actual target, was already across the sea, safe. Walpurga Hausmannen worked as a licensed midwife in the German town of Dillingen for over 30 years. She delivered hundreds of babies. She was a widow, poor, and by 1587 she was old, which in a small Bavarian town during the Counter-Reformation was a dangerous combination. Babies had been dying in Dillingen, some at birth, some in the cradle a few days later. The town council started asking who had been present at each death, and Walpurga's name kept coming up because Walpurga had been present at almost every birth in town. They arrested her and turned her over to the executioner. Under torture, she confessed to a story so detailed, it reads like someone trying very hard to give the right answer. She said that 30 years earlier, a man named Federlin had seduced her in her own kitchen, and turned out to be a demon. She said the demon convinced her to renounce God, gave her an ointment made from dead children's bodies, and sent her to murder the babies she was supposed to be delivering. She confessed to killing more than 40 infants by pressing on their soft skulls or sucking blood from them in the cradle. Her execution on September 20th, 1587 was one of the most elaborately cruel on record. She was tied to a cart and dragged through the town. At 5 stops along the route, the executioner tore strips of flesh from her arms with red-hot iron pincers. Her right hand, the hand a midwife uses, was cut off. Then she was tied to a stake outside the town walls and burned. Her ashes were thrown into a stream so that not even her dust would remain in Dillingen. Witch and vampire were rarely just descriptions of what someone did. They were names you got called right before you became useful to someone else as a corpse, a confession, or a story.